I've got here on the wall in front of me two very, very special prints. These are lithographs made by the artist Anthony Gross for a series that was commissioned by the Lyons tea rooms in the late 1940s, 1950s. Anthony Gross is an artist who's very special to us. We had our first Anthony Gross exhibition in 1988. That's before the major retrospective that took place at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And even before that, a number of years before that, we were buying his work, showing off his etchings here at the gallery. He's someone who has been of great interest, of taken a really special place in our hearts for a number of years. You might have seen from some of our recent videos that we are the very proud new representatives of the Gross estate. So it's wonderful for that connection to have come full circle. So there's lots more stories from Gross's wonderful life to be told over the coming months and years. First off though, these prints. I've got here the first and the second state from Gross's Herne Bay Pier. This was a print that was commissioned by the Lyons tea rooms for their series of lithographs. There's an interesting story to this series. You might have seen last week that we featured a video on John Piper's Nursery Frieze. That was also a similar venture to the Lyons series. A series of lithographs produced around the war, something that seems to have cropped up a number of times in different guises. You might know as for the school prints, that's a similar venture to the Lyons series. The Lyons series was quite different though. The Lyons tea rooms were very popular in the pre-war period. You'd have seen them on the streets, on corners in many English towns and cities. They were a very popular social gathering place where you could come and have a slice of cake, a cup of tea, natter away over what's been going on through the week. They also liked to keep up the decor with the current trends and fashions of the time. So there was lots of redecoration, keeping the walls fresh, keeping the places vital, and really a lovely place for people to come and visit and congregate and spend some time. Now, unfortunately, the Lyons tea rooms were hit hard during the Second World War. First, by the rationing of things like sugar, flour, tea itself, jam, all the things you need to make a nice cake and a nice cup of tea. And then immediately after the war, the rationing on materials like paint and wood and plaster made it difficult for them to keep the shops in good nick. So they were in need of a facelift after the war. The Lyons directors got together and had to think, how can we freshen up the place without spending money on these things that we can't get hold of? They came up with the idea of commissioning artists, British artists, of a number of very different artists, established and young up-and-comers in a number of different fields, to make beautiful prints that they could then put up in their tea rooms. This one of Herne Bay Pier in Kent, which I believe is now actually destroyed. I think the pier was smashed in a storm and it's not there anymore. This is a beautiful print that was made by Anthony Gross. It was commissioned as part of this series, the first series that was made in the late 1940s. In fact, the Lyons prints went on for a second and a third series, and Anthony Gross, among the number of artists who were asked to make prints, was asked back. He was one of very few artists asked back to make a second and a third print. So he also made for the second series a beautiful image of a cricket match and then of a Louisiana landscape for the third series. This is an image that's very typical of Gross's work. Gross is one of those British artists who has sort of slipped through the cracks. He's sort of off the radar for a lot of people, and it's probably because he was so successful, so proficient in a number of different mediums. He was principally known as an etcher. He had travelled across Europe before the Second World War and developed a really beautiful, very typical etching style that sort of celebrated the beautiful clear line you can get in etching. You can see some of that in the beautiful fishing lines and waves of this print. He was also a celebrated book illustrator throughout his life, a painter of watercolours and oils, and he's probably best known as our most prolific war artist. He made several hundred watercolours across the period of the Second World War, 1941 to 1946. He was stationed across the world, from north of Africa through to Iran, India, Burma, made a huge number of images. Gross would have been commissioned for this series not long after the war, so he was not an unknown artist. He was known to people as the man behind these many documents from behind the war. What's fascinating about this, though, is that of all the prints in the Lyons series, which were shown mostly on the walls in the cafes themselves, but were also for sale, Gross's became the bestseller from the first series. It was the print to buy, and it was the one that sold out quickly, sold many more copies than any of the others.
Paperwork, not my favourite occupation.
Nor mine.
It's going to be from now on.
Oh, charming.
Health report, dock report, crew report, food report, log report, sports report, diesel oil and fuel report.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
In fact, Herne Pier was so popular, it was even used in the set dressing of Carry On Cruising. It was actually quite difficult for people to buy the prints. They were mostly up in the tea rooms. You couldn't buy them off the walls. You had to apply for them directly to the Lyons & Co. Limited Company. So it's actually extraordinary that they even sold out at all. So popular was it that the directors asked him to come back and make a second state. And that's what we've got here on the right-hand side. Now, a state in printmaking terms is a bit like a draft in writing. An artist might make their first version of a print and be happy with it, print a few copies, and then they might make a few revisions to the plate and make a few more copies. Each time that plate is revised, we call it a second or a third or a fourth state. In this instance, though, the reason we had a second state was because the first had completely sold out. And what's fascinating to me is that Gross has changed so much while keeping the image almost exactly the same. The more you get into the nitty-gritty detail of this image, and Gross was a real lover of detail, you see he's redrawn almost the entire plate on this second print over here. And there's a number of reasons why he probably made some of these changes. I thought we could dive into it and have a look at some of the things, see some of the things that he's changed. Most obviously, this was one of the very first lithographs that Gross made. He had his hand held in the process by the print men at Chromo Works, where it was printed, and by Barnett Friedman, who was one of the principal artists responsible for sort of helping people through the series. So you can see down here, he's actually written his signature in straight onto the block, which is then printed in reverse. If you look at the second state, he's changed that. His signature is now the right way around. But there's a lot more interesting details that he's changed as well. Lots of changes in the figures. You'll see this girl and boy down here have been swapped with this lovely girl in her tartan skirt has been replaced with a young girl in trousers and a stripy top, a little bit more of the time perhaps. And this little figure down here is suddenly now facing us. You'll notice a few bits of redrawing have gone on too. So these sort of slightly squiggly lines up here on the pier have been cleaned up on this side. And generally, a lot of the details have been sort of changed around and manipulated a little bit. One of the big differences you'll see is in the colour. In both these prints, you're drawn straight to this little girl in this beautiful bright orange coat and dress here with her spade. She's redrawn slightly in this version, but the colours are very different in the second state. In fact, one of the things that Gross mentioned when they made the first print was how difficult it had been to get the colour right. And actually, later on, when he made his prints for the second and the third series, the chief lithographers at Chromo Works actually bought in new paint specifically for him. They sent samples to him so that he could match up and get as closely as he wanted. There's a delightful hustle and bustle to Gross's work. In fact, Rigby Graham, he described it as Gross's Gallic bouillabaisse of detail. Gross spent a lot of his time in France, particularly after the war, and he had a kind of quite a French sensibility to his art. And I love that idea. I love the idea of a kind of stew of all sorts of different things going on. That's exactly what you get in this print. Look at the beautiful details in some of these fishing lines, all crisscrossing. This wonderful curve in this line up here, which is so reminiscent of Gross's earlier linear etchings. And then all the wonderful incidental details that he loved to sneak in, these little crabs and starfish, the dog up here, even these little figures swinging on the pier up here. One of the lovely things about Gross is that even though his images have a real sense of artist know-how to them, there's a beautiful arrangement to this composition, this beautiful balancing between the clear, swirling sea and the clear sky up here, and all this rich detail down here. These four women here, almost like graces from classical sculpture, from classical iconography, standing here. This net that with this group sort of divides the print into thirds and this beautiful outstretched pier. Even given all of that formality, there's a real kind of wit to Anthony Gross. He didn't take himself too seriously. And alongside these beautiful details, he included those little jokes like these swinging figures, or this man bending down, scrabbling around with his worms in his bait box here. Gross was, I think, actually a keen fisherman, particularly earlier in his life, so you can sense there's a kind of quite a personal connection to this print. These were printed at Chromo Works in London. In fact, that was the same printers who made the labels for Heinz baked beans. One of the artists who was responsible for a print in one of the later series remembers turning up at the print studio and seeing these great big vats of blue paint ready for the Heinz tin labels. It's amazing to think that Gross was a very established artist at this point, very well respected, particularly as a printmaker. To ask him back to revise his print for this second state and not simply reissue the one that he'd already done shows a real kind of determination, both on the Lyons point of view, but also from Gross himself, a real dedication to what he put down on paper. And that's really something that you see throughout his career. It's a real shame that he has sort of been largely forgotten by the art establishment in recent years. As I mentioned at the start of this video, our relationship with Gross goes way back. It's almost 40 years now that we've been buying, selling, trading and enjoying his work. In those 40 years, I think we've seen this print maybe once before. That's how spectacularly rare it is, particularly to find them in good condition. A lot of these prints, after enjoying a bit of success in the sort of post-war period, then ended up in people's attics or people's basements, and not a lot have survived. So it's astonishing to have found not just this first, but also this second state in mint condition. I hope that they're enjoyed in the home that they're going off to. I thought we would catch them before they leave and just show an interesting slice of art history here from the Lyons Tea and Art series. This is, I think, one of Gross's most successful prints. It's a really beautiful image. It's got everything that you would expect from Gross. It's been lovely to spot the difference, to pick out some of the little details that have been changed, the changes in colour, the changes in shape. Just tiny little things that give these two different prints a whole world of new experience, even though they're essentially exactly the same. I hope you've enjoyed seeing them today. There's more to come from Anthony Gross in the future.